Greetings. I'd like to welcome you to a Perspectives on Economic Liberty lecture sponsored by the Center for the Study of Economic Liberty. The Center for the Study of Economic Liberty is devoted to evaluating the contribution of economic liberty to human prosperity and betterment. And you saw out on the table outside, prior to the food out the door, some of the material from the center's activities, most notably our recent release right here in this building of the Doing Business North America report, which is a database, actually, a database project collecting regulations related to various aspects of undertaking business in jurisdictions across North America, from Canada, the United States, and Mexico. But the Perspectives series is a lecture series we started basically as soon as we were able to. I think the first lecture was last fall, and gives us an opportunity to bring in speakers from outside Arizona State to address issues that connect to economic liberty in different ways. And certainly our discussion this afternoon is an example of that. Our speaker is Roger Koppl. Roger is a professor of finance at the Whitman School of Management at Syracuse University. He is well known in the Austrian economic tradition for his work on various aspects of financial and monetary theory. And this book takes some of the issues that have informed his work in those areas into thinking about a broader range of issues about expert failure. Roger has served as a faculty member in the past at Copenhagen Business School. Any connection to Nikolai Foss there?
Nikolai was not my host at that, but of course I know Nikolai and have since he was a graduate student.
Right. Auburn University and Farley Dickinson University. And he's been a visiting, held visiting positions at New York University, George Mason University, the University of Vasa. I had to look that one up. It's in Finland. That made me envious. That was one of the reasons why I wondered if there was a Nikolai connection. And one of the Max Planck Institutes of Economics. He's the past president, is a past president of the Society for the Development of Austrian Economics, and the former editor of Advances the former editor of Advances in Austrian. I don't want to get the word Austrian in there.
You're going to say I was advances in Estonian economics, but actually it's
or
Austrian economics.
Or Knightian economics, or Chicago economics, or something like that. Advances in Austrian economics. Anyway, please welcome with me Roger Koppl to our Arizona State University. Thanks.
That's fabulous. Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. Today is the 7th of November, so the Thanksgiving gift-giving season is well advanced. And there's no present like my book, Expert Failure, from Cambridge University Press, that says I love you, So think of this book.
Is that an expert opinion?
That is my expert opinion. $12.35 today on Amazon. Okay, cheaper actually than the $14.60 for the Kindle version. So, and it's sort of the content of that we'll be discussing today. I would like to, if I may, to just mention that I've also done work. The more immediate, actually, stimulus for the argument in this book was my work that Michael Sachs and I have talked about in the past in forensic science, where I've taken kind of economic point of view on forensic science error, which has been kind of a calling, but also just a lot of fun, in part because I meet cool people who are also compelled to try to do something about this urgent problem. Okay. So, unfortunately, I think first thing I want to do, I have sort of two charts to sort of summarize my argument in some degree, and we'll get to those in time. But I first think I want to sort of suggest to you that expert failure is a problem, and unfortunately there are plenty of examples. Okay? Expert failure can give us faulty forensics. This from just last Sunday's New York Times. Okay? This has kind of been a thing for me. I mean, besides the fact that I'm a lightweight, I just won't have a drink if I'm going to be driving, that same day, because I just fear those improperly calibrated so-called breathalyzer tests. Breathalyzer is actually a brand name, but anyway. So the substance story here from the New York Times is quite right. These breath alcohol tests used by American police departments, and I suspect probably elsewhere, may easily produce false, exaggerated, and unreliable results. And so this forensic test can put you in jail, as the headline, sort of warns you, whether or not you have driven drunk, whether or not you would ever drive drunk. Okay? Thus, from the New York Times. Okay? But the New York Times itself, unfortunately, is not incapable of its own expert failure, so-called fake news. I'm thinking here, unfortunately, it's merely one salient example, the case of Judith Miller and her reportage on the Iraq War. We should remember that it was none other than the New York Times that assured us through its reporting that Iraq did indeed have weapons of mass destruction, whereas in reality it had none. Yeah. The paper did produce a mea culpa, admitting to have found, quoting now, a number of instances of coverage that was not as rigorous as it should have been. You think? So, expert failure can give us faulty forensics, it can give us fake news, it can be a technical problem. Can anybody tell me, do you recognize what structure is collapsing there? The Tacoma Narrows Bridge. That is correct. It can be a business problem. Remember these, the Samsung phones that were like burning up and blowing up on people? You walk around your pocket, suddenly you're burned badly on your side. It can be an economic problem. Okay. Here's Alan Greenspan, celebrated as the greatest central banker of all time. You have to read the stuff to really appreciate the mainstream academic macroeconomic profession in the United States and beyond. I mean, this is the maestro. He was so lionized, loved, celebrated, the greatest central banker of all times. But the greatest central banker of all time was unable to prevent the Great Recession. And later, in a famous mea culpa of his own, confessed to a flaw in his model of capitalism. Indeed, it is my conjecture, and I know that I'm not unique in this regard, that two important cases of expert failure in the United States contributed greatly to a shift toward populism in the American electorate. One was the Great Recession of 2007-2009. Of course, the Great Crisis was fall of 2008. Anyway, the Great Recession of 2007-2009, together with the subsequent bailouts, in which big players are saved, while ordinary Americans, many of them, experienced unemployment or went underwater on their mortgages, or, of course, both. That was like a big deal. People could see who got bailed out and who didn't. The other politically important case of expert failure, I believe, though not the only one, but the other really big, important, salient one, even more important than the others, I believe, was this weapons of mass destruction fiasco in Iraq, together, of course, with the subsequent war in which American lives were lost and an alarmingly large but still ambiguously counted number of Iraqis, including, of course, Iraqi citizens. So continuing anyway on my litany of sort of categories, expert failure can be a social problem. Indeed, this is the lead example in the book. By lead, I just mean, the first one I discuss. Also very important, I think it's not, received the attention and attained the importance that, in my view, it intrinsically deserves. In the U.S., environmental experts in the state of Michigan and in the federal government assured the people of Flint, Michigan, that their water was safe to drink when it was not. I mean, it was lead-filled poison destroying the lives of Flint children. Pardon my excitation, but this is like a big deal. This image, which I view as highly reliable, shows tap water in Flint Hospital on 16 October 2016. In case the image is difficult to see, perhaps the YouTube viewers can't see the image clearly, that's brown water coming out of that hospital pipe into the hospital sink. Brown water, I mean really dark brown water. Okay? Here's a even darker water spilling, according to a blogger who's posted this on with the title, "The Water in My Laundry Room Sink of 2/19/16." Yeah. So you take a bath, you take a shower in that. Okay, your skin may be scalded and burned. There is currently, supposedly, and I can't independently confirm this is true, but I suspect it is, very high levels of intellectual defect among Flint children, attributable in all likelihood to the lead-filled poison that was spewing out of the Flint plumbing. Now, supposedly, the officials are now like, yeah, it's okay, maybe boil the water. It's okay, you can drink it. I would not drink the water in Flint, Michigan if I were a resident of Flint, Michigan. And I would likely turn down an opportunity to go to a convention meeting or event in Flint, Michigan out of fear that I might inadvertently consume some of that water, which perhaps is fine, I suspect is not. Now, at last, I'd like to, among sort of these examples, meant to bolster the idea that expert failure is like a big deal, it's a big problem. I'd like to say a few words about eugenics and population policy. We have seen eugenic practices. I thought for a long time eugenics, oh yeah, back in the ancient past, oh, it's a terrible thing. Oh, glad we're past that. No. Ross is shaking his head no. He knows that this is a current issue. Yeah. We have seen eugenic practices as recently as 2010 in the California prison system, and you may fear that they are going on I certainly fear that eugenic practices are going on in American prisons today, if not still in California, likely in other states. And as recently, we have documented cases, as recently as 2017 in Canada, where indigenous, again, you have to fear it's still going on, 2017, that was yesterday, where indigenous women were pressured into tubal ligation. Okay? You can't hold your child until you agree to sign this form. Don't worry what the procedure is. It's okay. Just sign this form, then you can hold your child. So this is, I view, quite dreadful and scandalous. And here the persons being so pressured were, and let me be clear, tubal ligation is a form of sterilization. The women being so pressured were apparently pressured because they were indigenous women. So it's very much a eugenic practice. Eugenic policies, properly speaking, depend on the assumption that disfavored human qualities are heritable. Right? So if you don't have that assumption at work, then it's something else, it's not eugenics. Okay? The broader category of population policy does not require this assumption. Nevertheless, when the size or composition of the population is a policy objective, the people are being viewed as livestock. Humans are being viewed in the same perspective as the farmer views their livestock, meant to serve an end separate from the population's component individuals whose autonomy and dignity should instead, I believe, be respected. So this perspective of human husbandry may easily make coercive measures more desirable for some political actors. Now, several policy issues have been linked to population size, including global warming. Fewer people, especially fewer rich people, we are told, would imply fewer carbon emissions. And I note particularly an article appearing in Social Theory and Practice in 2016, co-authored among several others, by Travis Reeder. In this article, Population Engineering the Fight Against Climate Change, they say that, quoting, the dire and imminent threat of climate change requires an aggressive policy response, that it is reasonable to think that this response should include population engineering, end quote. Further, they argue, quoting again, aggressive implementation of well-designed, choice-enhancing, preference-adjusting, and incentivizing interventions. Oh, I'm so glad they're choice-enhancing. Interventions aimed at reducing global fertility would be morally justifiable and potentially effective parts of a global population engineering program. End quote. Policies that do not, and again I shall quote, policies that do not consider population as a variable to be manipulated might turn out to be too little too late. So, the greater the supposed urgency of global warming, and in another project, this urgency of global warming has been really impressed upon me, and has become sort of an urgent issue for me at a rather personal, visceral level. Still, the greater the supposed urgency of global warming and income inequality, the more likely we are to have coercive population policies. This sort of thing, okay, so you might say, well, all right, some nerdy academics, they wrote this thing, okay, let 100 flowers bloom, that's just one that we'll cut down. Of course, Mao cut them all down, but let that go. This sort of thing, has reached popular news and entertainment media. One of the co-authors of the just cited article, ethicist Travis Reeder of the Johns Hopkins University, has appeared on the TV show. I've never seen this show. I don't get the premium channels. Bill Nye Saves the World. How many are like, yeah, I know that show? Yeah, several hands have gone up. Bill Nye Saves the World, making more or less the same argument. Mr. Nye seems to have gotten the message. When it comes to climate change, so should we have policies that penalize people for having extra kids in the developed world? So I do think we should at least consider it, says Mr. Reeder. Yeah. Boy, she's not happy with that answer. And she's right not to be. Nor does she seem very thrilled with it either. So I think it's fair to say, given all these examples, and unfortunately others I have not discussed, that there is a problem of experts and it matters. I think that's already an important part of the story, right? There is a problem of experts and it matters. It's worth knowing then under what conditions expert failure is more likely, under what conditions it's less likely. If we can somehow influence those conditions, and one of the things is to know what conditions we can influence in this regard. Anyway, if we can somehow influence the conditions that themselves help to determine when for expert failure is more likely, well, then maybe we can do something to reduce the incidence of expert failure. Okay? And if we know when expert failure is more likely, we may be able to protect ourselves against the ill consequences of expert failure, at least in one way or another. So it seems that we need, as far as I can, seems that we need a theory of experts. So far, really, until my book, I don't think there's been a coherent, well, even today, I don't think we can really say that there's a coherent literature on experts. Rather, there have been many disparate literatures covering many fields, with important thinkers making no reference to one another. Important, contemporary thinkers making no reference to one another. Okay? So I felt at a certain point in writing the book that I needed to do a survey of the literature. Okay? But then I would discover that would just almost be like doing a survey of human thought. Okay, that's maybe a little ambitious. But I was able to work out a kind of template. Okay? a kind of as a framework that allows us to place all these different diverse writers into one coherent framework, and here it is. Okay? So, if you're going to have a theory of experts, then you have to have at least two categories of actors, experts and non-experts. Okay? And you can pretty much, I'm going to qualify that. There's different ways to think about things, et cetera, creativity of human thought, et cetera. But still, pretty much, you're going to have one of two attitudes about experts. In some, the lights just went down. Is that okay, or is that not okay? Oh, I see, we need to, all right. Perhaps if I gesticulate more violently, then we can keep the lights on. Anyway, look, so you're going to have experts, non-experts. Experts, you're going to have pretty much one of two attitudes, that somehow everything is cool and groovy, or wait a minute, maybe not, everything's not so groovy. Okay. My publisher objected to the word groovy. So I spoke of experts as either reliable or unreliable. Okay? But, I mean, of course, I wasn't really tempted to use the word groovy. But, you know, I tried to emphasize in the book, I hope I succeed in conveying the idea of this as a somewhat, you know, broad term, not necessarily reliability in the, you know, statistical decision theory type of sense, but just like, yeah, you know, you can rely on them or you can't. Okay? Non-experts, the same thing, sort of groovy, not groovy, right? Not groovy would be something like they're powerless, right? You know, the experts know better, they're the experts. Non-experts, they don't know, that's it, end of story. Right? Or maybe somehow, at least under some circumstances, non-experts may be, in some appropriate sense, empowered. Okay? So these are the two basic attitudes. So suddenly, you make just this humble little chart like that, and you can start putting people in the chart, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Francis Galton, J.M. Keynes. These tend to be people who sort of favor expert power, what I call the so-called rule of experts, about which more later, who view experts as basically reliable, they know better. Non-experts, you just sort of, you know, follow the advice of the experts, or the instructions or orders of the experts. I think Mannheim, Foucault, probably Marx, although I on purpose didn't put him here because he's so contentious. So many different and inconsistent interpretations of Marx, although Mannheim obviously coming up from Marx. But anyway, Mannheim, Foucault, they probably belong here in this category. Experts are unreliable, but non-experts are powerless, right? And it's all sort of some other thing going on that's sort of trapping us all there. And then in the case, if Marx belongs there, we can say, well, except for the proletarian vanguard, you know, and then they can really see things as they are. A lot of people, including someone who's kind of that I've drawn on a lot in my work as an economist, Alfred Schut, and the social epistemologist, Alvin Goldman, whom I just admire so much, and Merton, who's also wonderful. All these guys, though, they tend to view experts as reliable. But they're good at least on non-experts being in some way empowered. Okay? I like to be down here with Bernard Mandeville, Peter Berger, Thomas Luckman, Stephen Turner, in the category where the non-experts are at least potentially empowered, but we should in some sense be suspicious or skeptical of experts. That's pretty much it. Which box are you going to be in? And it's remarkable how, you know, complete and thorough that humble categorization really is. You pretty much put anybody in there. Okay? I got to say pretty much. You know, if I have a theory in which it's all, you know, which way experts are, which way non-experts are, is super endogenous and stuff like that, maybe this chart isn't going to quite capture where you're at. All right, but you know, it's amazing how good this humble classificatory scheme really is. And indeed, look, if we're going to have a theory of expert failure, name of the book is Expert Failure. If we're going to have a theory of expert failure, we almost have to be in the bottom row. Right? If experts are somehow groovy, not ungroovy, right, that is reliable in some broad sense, then there is no theory of expert failure. Okay? At least not a very interesting one. And if the theory of experts is going to be useful, help us to know when how we might in some way mitigate the problem of expert failure, whatever we means there, then we almost have to be in the left column. So if you're going to have a useful theory of expert failure, you almost have to be here in the lower right-hand box. Great source, an important source for my thinking on this famous book, Peter Berger and Thomas Luckman, The Social Construction of Reality. They say in the book, footnote, Berger and Luckman were not social constructionists, at least not as the term is so often used today, as I discuss in the book, with due quotes to illustrate how they are in my view, misconstrued as a certain kind of social constructionist. Of course, the term social constructionist is itself, very open, and so it depends on what precisely one means by that. Anyway, they have this beautiful quote. They say, I require not only the advice of experts, but the prior advice of experts on experts. The social distribution of knowledge thus begins with the simple fact that I do not know everything known to my fellow men, and vice versa. 1965, and culminates in exceedingly complex and esoteric systems of expertise. Okay? So they got the crucial point. Crucial point is divided knowledge. Different people know different things. That's why we have experts. Yeah? They got that, so it's a central epistemic point. They got that insight from their common teacher, Alfred Schutz, who in his turn got it from the famous economist, also from Vienna, F.A. Hayek, who of course got the Nobel Prize in 74, I think was Hayek's prize. It's kind of funny and interesting sort of footnote. And I think Hayek in this regard was influenced by his sort of mentor, Ludwig von Mises. So you have this funny thing where this idea of divided knowledge, perhaps beginning with Mises anyway, there with Hayek, then going to Schutz, then animating what is thought to be a treatise on social constructionism in today's sense. So it's kind of funny how the affiliation of ideas may sometimes work. Anyway, the point is not merely that different persons know different things, especially in the case of Hayek, is very clear. It's not just that different people know different things. It's the nature of that knowledge, okay? Which I don't think I'm going to get into that in this evening's discussion. I have this acronym SELECT. It's in the book. It's what that knowledge is like, that it's dispersed, that it's often tacit, that it's not very bookish, and so on. Okay? And that this is all terribly important, and this knowledge co-evolves with the division of labor. So the division of knowledge, on the one hand, it's the division of knowledge that creates a division of, on the one hand, it's the division of labor that creates the division of knowledge. Right? We specialize in our different tasks. We start to acquire knowledge that others who are specializing in other tasks don't have. But at the same time, it is that division of knowledge which then permits a further ramification of the division of labor, so they co-evolve, actually. Moreover, this insight of so-called dispersed knowledge, just recognizing that this is important. Literally, children of 3 and 4 perfectly well know that different people know different things. Okay? To know that this is a fundamental fact for the social sciences that's not such a trivial insight. Okay? How is this knowledge produced and distributed in society? So it's actually kind of a big deal. Just this seemingly humble insight that knowledge is dispersed through society. Different people know different things. So what did they say? I require not only the advice of experts, but the prior advice of experts on experts. The social division of knowledge thus begins with the simple fact that I do not know everything known to my fellow men, and vice versa, and culminates in exceedingly complex and esoteric systems of expertise. As you see, I like that quote. I've said it twice in a row now. There's so much we need to know to make a good choice. We know so little. We're like this. Oh, I don't know. We want our experts to save us from our ignorance. We want them to be like this. Yeah, sometimes they're more like this. Or maybe like this. Importantly, again, the dispersed knowledge can easily sound like something trivial. And sometimes, tragically, it is trivialized. And yet actually, so this like deep insight, at least in the hands of Hayek and others. Similarly here, I'm about to say something that could sound trivial, and yet, consistently following through the insight, they're not angels, they're not demons, they're not fools, they are humans. Leonardo's Vitruvian Man, of course, on the screen. Experts are humans. They are not divine creatures. Yes, some are evil. Any large collection of individuals, some will prove, unfortunately, to be evil. Some are good. Yeah, some are wise. Some are fools. They are humans and thus fallible. They are humans and thus motivated by the same things and to the same degree and in the same way as other humans are motivated. The same motivational structure. Okay? This humble truth has surprising implications. You know, when I say that to you, no one's going to stand up in the room and go, well, now, wait a minute, no. They're not just humans. They're somehow, different, special. No, of course nobody's going to say that. But you have to chase down consistently, logically, the implications of that humble insight. Turns out not so easy to do. It's particularly not so easy to do if you don't explicitly model the expert. If you let your model of the expert be implicit, they can turn into kind of a divine creature. This is a lot of times what we do with forensic scientists. We've got that label, scientist. Okay? If I don't model the forensic scientist, then, okay, he's a scientist, so he's like a truth machine. Done. Right? And then, the things that may cause so-called faulty forensics may escape my attention. Okay. So if experts are fallible human beings, then expert failure is normal. It's actually normal. Though anybody who knows Charles Perrow's, normal theory of accidents will see an allusion there. And if expert failure is normal, we should think about when expert failure is more likely and when less likely. We should try to figure out, as I said before, what conditions, kind of stimulate it, or rather instead discourage expert failure. And we should try to figure out maybe what we can do about them. Okay, so that's why there's a room to have a theory of experts, which I call information choice theory, because the expert chooses what information to share, what advice to give. Okay? Now I choose the label information choice in analogy to public choice. So here we see a photo from 1962, Rausch Hall, University of Virginia, of the original choice theorists of the University of Virginia. Two of those guys went on to earn Nobel Prizes. Just as public choice theory assumes people are the same in political markets and in other markets, information choice theory assumes experts are neither more nor less selfish than non-experts, neither more nor less foolish than non-experts, and so on. So if we're going to have a theory of experts, okay, so that's sort of this fundamental insight, they're people. But I still haven't done something very important that I must do if I'm going to have a theory of experts. Anybody happen to have a good guess what I'm thinking of? What's the thing I got to do if I'm going to have a theory of experts and I haven't done it yet? Please.
Define what an expert even qualifies as.
Goal. Correct. What is an expert? Okay. So let me now turn to that very important issue. Theorists of experts and expertise have focused on really pretty much without exception. There's kind of a partial non-exception for the theory of expert witnesses, because the expert witness is distinguished from other experts on account of they're giving an opinion, right? So there is that, but that's the theory of expert witnesses in law, right? And it's been very contained within that field. So with that partial non-exception, if I may use such terms, theorists of experts have focused on the supposed knowledge, the expertise of the expert. There's at least two problems with defining the expert by his expertise. First, we've seen one of them, right? We all occupy a different place. Each of us occupies a different place in the division of labor. Therefore, each of us occupies a different place in the division of knowledge. Each of us knows things not known by others. So each of us is an expert. So everybody's an expert. But if everybody's an expert, nobody's an expert, how can that word do any intellectual work for you? So that's a problem. That's probably the greatest problem with defining expert by their expertise. Yeah. But also, that's not identifying the role of the expert in the social system, particularly in the economic system. And I do provide an economic theory of experts, fundamentally, primarily, an economic theory, though not exclusively an economic theory of experts. So what's their social role? Well, in information choice theory, as I've tried to sketch it out, an expert is anyone paid for their opinion. Economists, forensic scientists, statisticians, they are experts. Race car drivers are not experts. If you're like a Formula One race car driver, you got a lot of expertise. You know all the dials and what they mean. You got all this tacit knowledge about how you drive those things and all this stuff like that. So you have quite a lot of expertise. But you're not being paid for your opinion about, Formula One racing or something like that. You're paid to race the car. Okay? So they're, notwithstanding high levels of expertise, race car drivers are not experts in the sense of my theory of experts, in the sense of information choice theory. All right, so they're human beings who are paid for their opinions. What are the salient, important assumptions about how these human beings are that drives the theory of experts, that drives information choice theory? Well, experts strive to maximize utility. In other words, they don't always seek the truth. Experts, well, the way I put it in the book is the expert cognition is limited and erring, I think is how I say it. That's a bounded rationality assumption. Somewhere, I think in this book, I come out with the phrase synecologically bounded rationality. The point there is that there's some question of whether the standard Kahneman-Simon model of bounded rationality is appropriate or inappropriate. I think I've been convinced by my colleague, my friend and sometime co-author Teppo Phelan, that the standard model of bounded rationality assumes, as they put it, an all-seeing eye, right? That certain things are excluded from us. Maybe certain calculations are too hard to do, but other than that, it's just like this perfect form of reason. And that omits the important fact that, wait a minute, no. Each of us is coming from a different point of view. Okay? This relates to something called the theory of affordances. Each of us is coming from a different point of view. So if you see how this insight that we have different points of view plays out in ethology, in like a biology department, it's like, well, the bat sees bat things, the dog sees dog things, the frog sees frog things. So it's not that the frog's rationality is more bounded than that of the bat or something like that. It's that their purposes, their orientation, their relevancies, if there's any Schutz scholars in the room, differ one from another. So maybe bounded rationality isn't the right word, but anyway, they're not smarter than us, than others who are non-experts. Okay? And then there's this funny third assumption I make here, that I was driven to by my work in forensic science. Incentives skew the distribution of errors, even honest errors. Okay? And my example for this is, if you're doing like a statistical study, okay? The scientist is doing a statistical study like the economist, he's maybe doing a econometric study, whatever. So you crunch the numbers and you test your hypothesis, and if the numbers confirm your hypothesis, everything's great, we'll send this off to the journal tomorrow. If not, it's like, well, wait a minute. Am I using the most recent data set? Is there a problem in the programming? Maybe the numerical algorithm used at this point to invert the matrix is letting errors come in. Right? You're diligent for ways things may have gone wrong. You are more diligent for ways things may have gone wrong when your statistical analysis surprises or disappoints you than when it produces what might be the desired result. Okay? And now this is an asymmetry that I think is quite real. It is on all of us, even those among us who would be mortified to think there was such an asymmetry in our response to the two different, events. So that's why I say even honest errors, oh boy, I'm way behind on time. I'll try to pick it up. Even honest errors are skewed by incentives. Just consider this as a standard thing. What's that middle figure? Well, it's the number 13. What's the middle finger? what's the middle figure here, pardon me? What's the middle figure here? Well, it's the letter B, but of course, the figure is unchanged. It's the context that has changed. Okay? I first saw this particular graphic, Michael Sachs, from Ithiel Dror. Okay? But of course, oh no, that's not true. I first found it from Reisiger, Sachs, and others in their 2002 article. That was even before I saw Ithiel use it. You used this in that 2002 paper, right? Yeah. Anyway, so we see that context, influences what we see. Okay. So all right. So we have some principles. Let's put them to work. Here's a map showing that in about 24 of the 50 states, public crime labs in the state, their budget it depends in part upon the number of convictions through so-called court-assessed fees assessed upon conviction. Right? Monies are raised for labs in Florida and Louisiana and Arizona and so on. Okay? So in these green states on the screen, in about 24 states of the Union, the public crime labs are working on commission. Okay? So that clearly creates an incentive to garner convictions, even when, in fact, independently of guilt and innocence. And again, that incentive is going to work on you as a forensic scientist, even if you would be mortified to think that it did. So you start to see why I advocate a lot of things that a lot of other people have advocated. Independence, crime labs should not be part of the law enforcement agency, which is typically what they are, or maybe in California in some counties they're in the prosecutor's office. No, they should be independent. It's easier to say independence than to get independence, but that's another matter. It's not a point to be pursued this evening. Blinding, which we now call sequential unmasking. So, you shouldn't have sort of a cheat sheet. Right now, typically, the forensic scientist has the full police case file. And so they know who they're trying to get and so on. Folks who work on the issue of sequential unmasking are trying to figure out and have made great progress in figuring out how to sort of hide from the forensic scientist information that's not necessary to make in order to make a scientific judgment. And then my contribution, I've made some contribution to that blinding discussion, I think, but also redundancy. That's sort of my unique contribution. Redundancy. I've proposed that we should randomly send sometimes evidence to maybe 3 labs instead of 2. See if the 3 labs give harmonious results. If they don't, we better know why not. Okay? So these are just a few principles to sort of illustrate how it is that once we've got a basic theory of experts where we just recognize that experts are humans, where is it? There it is. Experts are humans who don't always seek truth, who are not somehow, wiser or smarter or, more rational or something like that than non-experts, but have bounded rationality or whatever you want to call it, and who respond to incentives, okay? Responding in such a way that that incentives skew the distribution of errors, even honestly, even when they're trying to be all neutral and everything like that. Okay? So just those principles start to give us an approach to some of these problems in forensic science. So that's kind of a setup, as it were. Well, we're doing okay on time, actually. That kind of gives us a setup for the theory of expert failure. I have 2 chapters on this in the book. And I try to really kind of cover the territory as best as I was able. I hope I didn't omit some important category of influences on expert failure, including, the complexity of the underlying phenomena and so on. But the real core, central, the nub of the whole thing is in this very humble chart. Okay? There's 2, when do you get more when are you more likely to get expert failure? When are you less likely to get expert failure? Well, the 2 most important dimensions determining, or issues or questions determining that, are whether the expert decides for the non-expert or merely advises the non-expert, and whether the expert has monopoly power or in some sense does not and instead is competitive. That poor innocent word, competition. I discuss it at some length in the book because competition, competitive, these terms mean different things to different people. So, you need to have genuinely free entry. There needs to be genuine rivalry between contestants, competing agents. Okay? And there needs to be what in biology is called degeneracy, what I try to relabel as cynical logical redundancy. They can't all be the same. Okay? So that's a brief peek at what I'm kind of trying to get at with the word, that poorness and potentially deceptive word, competitive. So those two dimensions, okay, kind of determine to a high degree the chances of expert failure. So what I call the rule of experts is when you have monopoly experts who decide for the non-experts. So state-administered eugenics programs is sort of a salient example of that, but also something like central bank monetary policy would be an example of that. That's where you have your highest chance of expert failure. And indeed, I think there was a kind of expert failure in monetary policy that contributed, made the really crucial contribution to the crisis of the fall of 2008. And in this opinion, I am not alone. It's not by any stretch of the imagination. That's one of the standard interpretations I think is right. The quasi-rule of experts is when you have, the expert deciding for the non-expert, but at least there's some form of competition. Economists, Thibault competition is kind of what I have in mind here. If you live in, let's say a suburban community around some large city, well, and you have sort of a reasonable degree of affluence, some degree of affluence, so you can move from one city to another. Okay? Then you'll find the suburb that sort of most satisfies your preferences, your needs and preferences. And that's true, and so that's not too bad. You end up in a community that's, pretty good. Notwithstanding the fact that somebody else is deciding, what's going to be in the school curriculum, where the stop signs are going to be, and how much parking there'll be in the downtown of that suburban community, and so on. You have a lot of experts making a lot of decisions for you, but there's a kind of competition among the experts, because for sufficiently affluent communities, the citizens of those communities pick up and move to the next suburban town over, or the suburban town on the opposite side of the metropolis. So that's not too bad. Or then again, there's expert-dependent choice, like if you have a state-enforced religion, okay, where, the expert maybe has monopoly power, only the priest, may be a priest, only the Roman Catholic priests, say, may promulgate their religion, but they're just giving you advice. So you decide whether or not you're going to imperil your immortal soul by, sinful activities, such as dancing. So that's not so bad. Of course, it's not the Catholic Church that prohibited dancing that I know of. The really good thing, though, is this one, what I call self-rule or autonomy, where in some good sense you have competition among the experts who are merely advisory and not choosing for you. And my big example on that is Consumer Reports. Okay? That's like a warm fuzzy, right? Because, they have their experts. Okay, so we'll go a little over the time I had desired to run, but I think we'll still have a half an hour, won't we, So the Consumer Reports, they have their experts. They tell you, which is the better toaster, which is the worst. But you don't have to follow that advice. You can flout their advice and buy whatever toaster you want. Moreover, if Consumer Reports starts to give lousy advice, well, there's other similar services available that you can turn to, turning away from Consumer Reports and turn to, CNET, I guess, for tech stuff and so on. Okay. And in fact, I was looking for cases where Consumer Reports got it wrong. And I did find a couple, But in every case, the error was in the direction of like excess caution, never to imperil the reader and relying on the expertise of Consumer Reports, and were immediately, very quickly corrected. So, I mean, they have a really good batting average as far as I can see. So that's sort of, exemplar, as it were, of self-rule or autonomy, of the non-monopoly, the competitive expert who merely advises. My talk promises to say a few words about fake news. Let me discharge that important responsibility now. This was the story in the Babylon Bee, for those who may not know. It's a strictly satirical, I guess, news site. I don't think they have a printed version of their publication. So it's a satirical news site. And this story, which is just, silliness embodied, actually received a serious response from Snopes saying, oh, it's false. The story, in case anybody can't see the screen clearly, the headline reads, CNN purchases industrial-sized washing machine to spin news before publication. Okay. So Snopes has entered the field to assure us all that this is not a correct and true story. So the theory of expert failure may be of some assistance in thinking about fake news. It's not going to, nail all issues or something like that. But I think we have around us a lot of good evidence that the so-called market for ideas is important. It's very important. I think we really have to sort of face up to the fact the market for ideas just doesn't work very well. Okay? And I think so-called cosmopolitan liberals, such as myself, should recognize and accept the fact that this is true. It doesn't work that well, the market for ideas. Julius Caesar said, if I may translate freely, that men freely believe what they damn well please. If you've ever read Dostoevsky's Man from the Underground, sort of the same thing. He trods gleefully upon rationality from the same motive, because he damn well pleases to. The human mind, remember, was not designed to love truth or wisdom. It was designed, if that's the right word, probably not, it was designed by natural selection to produce differential reproductive success. So we shouldn't be surprised then that we humans have trouble tracking truth, and therefore we shouldn't be surprised that the market for truth doesn't work very well. So therefore, we should regulate news agencies. That's not my conclusion. It's not my conclusion at all. Mark Zuckerberg has said on 30 March 2019 in a op-ed appearing among other places, I guess, in the Washington Post, one idea is for third-party bodies to set standards governing the distribution of harmful content, and to measure companies against those standards. Regulation could set baselines for what's prohibited, and require companies to build systems for keeping harmful content to a bare minimum. So we are getting serious calls for governmental regulation of speech deemed harmful. This is not like an imagined threat or problem or issue. Such regulation could appear reasonable or desirable if we imagine the regulators as, divine creatures. But any such regulatory body would have to formulate and articulate an opinion on what speech is harmful. Okay? Regulation, in other words, would give monopoly power to a body of experts to choose for us what speech we might hear. Regulation of the sort that Zuckerberg called for in the passage that I quoted. There's other forms of regulation that I'm not addressing in these comments. So Zuckerberg is basically saying we should be here, okay, which is exactly the category that gives us the greatest chance of expert failure. So the disease is worse than, the cure is worse than the disease. Okay? So, we're coming back to the old insight that free speech, like democracy, is the worst possible system, except for all the others. Thank you, Winston Churchill. It is likely that most, perhaps all people in this room would probably agree, maybe I'm wrong, but I bet you probably all of you would agree, that we should not somehow regulate religion. But wait a minute. Religion is more important than the news, right? Your very soul is at stake. Okay? So if it makes sense to regulate news, right, and filtering out harmful content, surely it is all the more urgent that we should regulate religion. So if that inference is uncomfortable to you, perhaps you should rethink the notion that regulation of the harmful content is in news media is somehow appropriate. And the other way about. Let's see. So if regulation of religion is inappropriate, okay, wouldn't your reasons for doing so fear of the power, the irresponsible power that would play in the hands of government officials? Doesn't that also imply that maybe it's better not to regulate harmful content or fake news in our various news media? Okay. So the key points tonight, this evening, this afternoon: expert failure is an important problem. It's more likely when experts have monopoly power. It's more likely when experts choose for non-experts. Oops, sorry. There it is. Expert failure is an important problem. More likely when experts have monopoly power. More likely when experts choose for non-experts. So my conclusion, if I may quote the last words of my book: value expertise, but fear expert power. You can't not have expertise because of this reason, the division of labor, the division of knowledge. You got to value expertise. But ladies and gentlemen, do please fear expert power. Thank you.
We have some time for questions, and we usually start our question with students who would like to ask questions. So are there students who would like to ask questions? Then I will turn the floor over to others. Who has the first question? We're getting several. I'll hold off on you since they're farther away. No, well,
I'm not sure Ross Emmett is applying the principle of generality of rules here. He turned to you as a named individual and said, "You later."
No, go ahead, go ahead. Hi, I'm in a career where people expect us to be. Is it closer? In my career in medicine, we're all expected to be experts, which is huge pressure and
Yes,
also a huge responsibility, which most of us take very seriously. But as I heard, and thank you very much. This is a very important subject, and you've really done a great job of outlining a lot of the problems and hopeful success. But the notion of medicine is a certain amount of modesty. How many modest surgeons do you know? But look at the history of a certain procedure in medicine. And you brought up something about looking at various experts, 3, not 2.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, people send pathology lab material, pathological slides to other people, like the armed services, if they have a question about whether it's right. So that bit of modesty is critical, and that may not be easy to find, especially with people who are mensas. In any case, the differential diagnosis is what we do in medicine, which says, what could this circumstance I'm seeing in the patient be? And then you list them, okay? And the professor helps you focus and say, well, is it lupus, or is it cancer, is it infectious? And you try to zero down on what we call the differential, which means what do the facts support, even in a small fraction, okay?
Right.
And I think that is where so much of what you're talking about is not being done. There's a certain amount of arrogance which tenured professors may all have, but probably all don't. Never. And I think that's, to me, the monopoly concept too. In other words, don't criticize the chief of the department. Okay, if we did that in medicine, we would fall, okay?
Yeah.
You have to always say, I may be wrong. And I think that arrogance is a huge issue. Here, sorry.
Well, yeah, no, those are great comments. Thank you. Yeah, it's really a challenge to get monopoly experts to exhibit humility. this is one approach to the problem of expert failure. It's just sort of cajoling experts to, and it's in the literature, cajoling experts to be humble. The plea for experts to be humble is not wrong, but that's not like a structural solution to a structural problem. So as a human being, you couldn't be more right. It's very important that we be humble. Yeah, college professors are not the place to look for a lot of examples of humility. So I'm kind of embarrassed to be in this line of work. And so, yeah, it's a very deep problem. You mentioned sort of the monopoly issue, right. I think with medicine, as in many other areas, you have a professional organization, the AMA, which is supported by the state, because it is the AMA which decides who may sit for a medical exam in each of the 50 states, right, and become, therefore, a doctor. A medical licensing exam. So that gives monopoly power to the AMA, and a part of what any professional organization wants to do and strives to do, including, as far as I'm aware, the American Medical Association, is establish uniformity of opinion, uniformity of standards. Yeah? So we choke off exactly that sort of biological degeneracy, what I call synecological redundancy, which would accelerate human knowledge, and we retard human knowledge, and sometimes, as we've seen tragically, reinforce therapies that are destructive and not constructive. So, the sort of long-run solution on that, I think, has to be to eliminate those legal restrictions. Probably not just like overnight, okay? But I don't think it's that big a deal, would be that big a deal, if we could only have the political solution effective, that's the big deal. But sort of structurally designed, to just sort of dismantle licensing restrictions in medicine, I think is quite doable. It's a problem. You have to figure out how to do it right. You can't just say, okay, anything goes. Right? You have to unwind. But I think it's not that hard to figure out how to unwind. The trouble is that there's a lot of interests aligned against any such unwinding. Does that make sense to you? I see you nodding your head. I'm glad if that made sense.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor. We could maybe craft a case from political philosophy that backs up your argument quite a bit, and the weakness of aristocracy, the peculiar vice of aristocracy that is unique to aristocrats is haughtiness, or what we would call arrogance, which you referenced. And I would go even further, and drawing from political philosophy to say it to argue that the correct opinion, it doesn't really require power for its advancement, because it can depend upon the merit of its correctness. Whereas incorrect and immodest opinion, it does require power to advance itself.
Yeah.
Because the demerits of its own case undermine its adoption.
Yeah.
And so this is why I think you often see, and we can see this in political philosophy, discussed and then illustrated in political history, Caligula, who makes his horse proconsul, or Castro, who brags he's going to make the biggest strawberries in the world and demonstrate the excellence of the communist collectivism. Yeah. And he does, but you can't eat them, right? I mean, so this is why you often see that where you see tyranny, you usually also see stupidity. And so, whereas, correct opinion, if you really know you're right, you don't need governmental power. You don't need to suppress freedom of speech. You don't need to have monopoly control over anything, because you can be confident that you can convince other people. So I think there's a lot there in political philosophy that backs up your case. I would just say, where I see kind of a unique contribution in your work that interests me is this idea of cognition, and that experts just see the world differently, and I'm very curious to know about that body of literature.
All right.
And maybe that's because I haven't read Hayek on when he started moving on to study the human brain and all that. And
Oh, yeah, Hayek's The Sensory Order is a marvelous book and worth,
I should
worth the
probably
pain
read
cost
that,
of reading, which is high.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I wonder, I mean, maybe if there's that's why he went in that direction, was to understand the mind of central planners. So,
Sensory order, as Roger will tell you, is actually the paper that he wrote in 1920 before he ever entered economics. He turns it into a book in 1952, but the core argument is the same argument in 1920. So it's actually the starting point of Hayek.
oh, really? Gosh, well, I'm
Before
learning.
he fell under the influence
Yeah.
of.
Well, I wonder,
Mises.
Professor, if you can address that some more, or if
Can
this because I don't know of anything in political philosophy that helps us understand why it is that people with, why aristocrats see the world differently.
Yeah, I'll babble a few minutes here, but I don't know if I'm going to hit right on the issue that you may have in mind. So this might be something we could pick up again a little later. I would welcome that. Can I just say a word in defense of Caligula? I mean, let's be clear. Caligula was a son of a bitch. But I think the thing about making a consul, but then it was his enemies who wrote the history. Right? So I don't think he was mad at all. I think he was just a one mean son of a bitch. So when the Senate seemed to him to be exceeding the limits in which he felt within which the Senate should remain, he exercised his power to demonstrate what he imagined to be, mistakenly as it turns out, his superior power. He said, oh yeah, well, Senator, well, see this horse? Now that horse is my consul. What do you think of that, buddy? Right? So I think it was a very brilliant, aggressive power move. It was a brilliant statement. Although at the end of the day, it turns out it was Caligula who had exceeded his power, not the Senate. You mentioned the Castro strawberries. It makes me your comments about that made me think of Walter Euchen's two beautiful essays on Nazi planning. He really vividly portrays, how it is. You had the central planning under the Nazi regime, and so the relevant decision makers are sort of far from the events, relevant to those decisions. Okay? In other words, there are several steps up the hierarchy, and then something's going to happen in Berlin or in Leipzig or in Danzig or whatever. So they're looking, at a piece of paper in which all the texture, all the detail, all the particulars have been bled out. Okay? And when you're looking at that piece of paper with all the details bled out, well, how often did it turn out that bigger is better? So there was this gigantomania in the Nazi planning. They had these huge buildings, okay, which were often, deeply ill-conceived. Okay? So Castro seems to have run into a problem, something like that. Why are aristocrats arrogant? The different things come together. We humans seek status. Okay? So it's a lot about I have status, you don't. Okay? And so the expert, too, has status, right? The difficulty, we heard a physician just now speaking of the difficulty of being humble for that monopoly expert who is so, extolled by, the popular culture and by their very patients. So that's an issue. But also there's this, maybe this will address your issue. The way I like to put it, a competition turns wizards into teachers. When the expert has monopoly power, the incentive is to be a wizard. Okay? Oh, I'm very smart, I have all this expertise, and you don't. Okay? So humbly listen to me, and I'll tell you the answer. Okay? You can't understand the deep mysteries that I, as the wizardly expert, know, but I can tell you what to do in this case. Okay? That's a form of arrogance. that prevents you from challenging me or questioning me and preserves, therefore, my reputation. There's at least chance of, being discovered wrong if I don't tell you my reasons. Right? Just give you the final answer. Okay? What if I, as a wizardly expert, am, perhaps in a court of law, fully opposed in my interest to some competing expert? Because I'm working for the prosecution, they're working for the defense. Okay? Now, in that situation, I discuss this in the book. I mean, this is Holstrom and Milgram. It's not my own argument. Anyway, precisely because we're at antipodes, okay? Any relevant fact, information, argument, consideration, science, one of us is going to have an incentive to bring that out in the courtroom. Okay? Precisely because it matters, it's going to either help his case or it's going to help my case. Okay? So now you, the juror, the judge, or whatever, the third party trying to judge, which expert are you going to view as somehow better? Okay? Well, if I get up there and say I'm a wizard, okay, but Michael is he kind of lays it out, explains it. This is what Koppl was trying to say, but you see there's these other considerations. He's now a teacher. You're going to go with the teacher, or you're going to go against the wizard. So I have an incentive to be myself a teacher. And in this way, competition turns wizards into teachers. Maybe that addresses your issue.
You also have the incentive to hit him over the head if you can't beat him with argument.
Well, not in a court of law, I don't. The bailiff won't like that. Okay? Which is why the rule of law is so desirable, right? Because it constrains me from that caveman impulse to kill my enemy. Right? And then I have to be a teacher. I have to be, I have to exercise candor and moderation, if I may quote Adam Smith. I have to exercise candor and moderation in the expression of my opinions. It was Adam Smith's belief that competition among religions produced candor and moderation among the divines of the different sects, and something similar is true among experts.
I have a shorter question. It seems to me that expert failure is an oxymoron, because if there's failure, they're obviously not an expert. So why not change the definition of expert to be those who get it right?
Well, that's the standard view. I talk about this quite a bit in the book. That's the standard view. We'll define the expert by their expertise. But that precisely gives me the problem that I can't have a theory of expert failure now, right? Because I have to just second guess who is and isn't really an expert, okay? And so now there's a whole category of questions that I'm not even able to ask. What sort of circumstances promote or discourage these sort of unhappy outcomes? Right? My answer is, well, I think if there's some kind of real competition among the experts and they're just advisory, right, then you get candor and moderation, you get less likely a chance that expert advice is somehow going to go fluey. Okay? I can't get to that answer. Maybe I'm wrong with that. Certainly I don't believe so myself. I believe I'm right about that. I can't get to that answer, okay, unless I have a different definition of expert, one that doesn't equate expert with correct. Okay? And my answer, my definition, as I said, is that the expert is anyone paid for their opinion. Okay? So the umpire in the baseball game, that umpire is an expert, because it's the umpire who decides whether the ball is in the line or is fair or foul, is on this side of the line or that side of the line. Okay? Have you ever gone to a baseball game and the umpire was subject to criticism that maybe he needs a new pair of glasses? Right? The experts are not always right. Okay? Not when defined as I prefer. And if we try to define experts in any other way by their expertise, all of a sudden the word can't do any intellectual work for us. Okay? It's not cosmic, it's more pragmatic issue at stake.
So I had a question regarding the one of the suppositions regarding your your 4-way or your 2x2 on kind of monopolies of experts versus competitive
This one?
experts.
Uh-huh.
Yes, that one, which is the particular idea that I question kind of how the idea that by making non-experts the decision makers. That you would increase the chance of expert failure. I don't fully see the logic there. As by as to me, I would assume that if the experts are the ones in the position of having to make decisions, that would increase their incentive to get it correct, because logically their head is on the line now. Whereas if they can now delegate responsibility to the non-experts, then it's there. And on top of that, the nature of competitive experts, I feel, would then further dilute it too, because now you also have these all combating heads, and they can always say, oh, well, it was contested, like we were all unsure, no one really had it right. Whereas with, the monopoly of expert, once again, it's the centration of responsibility upon this person to get it right. So I'm not entirely certain that these do have the chance, the likelihoods that you ascribe to them, and I would like to hear further explanation of why you think that is.
Okay, I think that your conjecture requires that these responsible experts have a conscience, have a very strong conscience that overwhelms other incentives which may be at work. Okay, and we may find cases, right? The human beast is heterogeneous, right? So we can find cases. But we have to, structure our institutions for, what may in some sense be the preponderant case and not the exception. To find experts of such acute consciousness that actually being in the position of deciding for the other and being in the position of a monopolist actually enhances rather than degrading the decision making. That's rare to find in the human beast. Such attuned consciousness. But wait, there's, like in those TV ads, but wait, there's more. Which is this idea of cynicalogically bounded rationality. In the sort of ecology of knowledge, which is the division of knowledge, right, the kind of flip side of the division of labor, every perspective is, perforce, naturally partial. That's what your mom was trying to tell you when she said, well, now, there's two sides to every argument. She wasn't wrong, and of course, often there's more than two sides. So even if we had a magic wand to make the experts, okay, have the kind of acute consciousness that you, and responsibility that you were imagining, or seemed to be imagining, forgive me if I've misunderstood your comments, that wouldn't allow the expert to see it from the point of view of the non-expert, okay, as much as he may try. Nor would it allow the monopoly expert to imagine all the different perspectives that competing non-monopoly experts might have. Okay? So even if we could have morally perfect experts, okay, but as long as there is cynicalogically bounded rationality, as long as the point of view matters, okay, then you don't want neither the expert deciding for the non-expert, nor the expert having monopoly. It's an epistemic point.
I think that answered my question perfectly. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I'm going to write this down in my diary this evening. That's fabulous. Dear diary, today I answered a question perfectly.
I don't know if I have a question so much as an observation, but your chart does lead me to believe that it's incumbent on us non-experts to really push the experts. And one theory that I've always subscribed to all my life, whether when I was in business, whether I'm dealing with my mechanic, when I faced open heart surgery, was you may be the expert, but I will not take your recommendations solely at face value. If you are truly the expert, you should be able to break things down in a way that I can understand so that I can pose
So you can make a
relevant,
sensible choice.
well, not only make the decision, but so that I can question you on why you got to this choice, what were the alternatives, why did you rule this out, why did you rule this in? So I mean, it seems to me it places a burden. The self-rule or autonomy seems to be the place to be. That places a big burden on us as consumers of experts.
Yeah, that's a beautiful commentary you just made. That's fabulous. I just am thrilled to hear you say that. Right. tell me if it's fair to sort of encapsulate your comments with the following remark. What you're saying is that for each of us as a non-expert, we should insist that the experts we consult, and we must consult experts, behave as teachers and not as wizards. That we have a right and a duty to ourselves to so insist. Yes, sir, right on. In technical language, I would respond to that by saying, right on, brother.
Please join me. Oh, one last question. How about you ask him as you, yeah, okay. Please join me in thanking Roger for being with us this afternoon.
Thank you all very much. It's been a thrill to be here. I know now better than I already did before I came what Ross is doing with the center, and I'm just, and your team. Well, I knew Scott already. It's fabulous. Congratulations. Thank you very much for having me.